So we've timed this morning pretty well, I would say. Not only did we see the Beirut explosion just a couple of weeks ago and the implication that Hezbollah is very much in the firing line now as a result of its dominance of Lebanon and what that has wrought. We've seen the UAE-Israel peace deal or normalization deal, and while the Arab world is sort of coming together in terms of normalizing gradually but inexorably with Israel, we see the anti-Middle East bloc led by Iran and Turkey rather upset and resisting those developments, together with, unfortunately, the Palestinian leadership. And what does that mean in terms of terrorism? And of course, in the last 24 hours, we've seen the Hariri verdict. So there are these issues and many more in which there's nobody better actually to comment and try and explain what on earth is happening than our guest of honor today, Dr. Matthew Levitt, and the topic being mapping Hezbollah's worldwide activities. Matt, over to you.
Thanks, Colin. Thank you all so much for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be back with AIJAC virtually this time. I've had the pleasure of coming to Australia and New Zealand with AIJAC 3 different times now. And I'm really pleased to say, actually, that some of the information that made it into my book and now into the map, I was able to collect during some of those trips. So before I open up the map, I just want to give you a little bit of background. The book came out, you can see it over my shoulder, in 2013. We published the paperback with an additional chapter on Hezbollah's activities in Syria and some new information that had come out on the details of their attack in Burgas, Bulgaria in 2012, and the plot that was thwarted in Cyprus just a few weeks before that, also in 2012. But something happened as the book was finished, but before it came out, that kind of shaped the whole environment and led me to this several-year-long endeavor to build this map. And that is that once the book was done and was peer-reviewed and was ready to go, and it just had to be published, it was being published by Georgetown University Press. It's great bona fides, but God bless university presses, they take a long time to publish, 7 to 9 months. As it happens in my case, late 2012, early 2013, that happened to coincide with the period when the European Union was deciding whether or not to designate Hezbollah in whole, in part, or at all. And so in tandem with the US State Department and the British Foreign Commonwealth Office, which were kind of leading the charge here, I made 7 or 8 different trips to Europe, several to Brussels. I testified before the European Parliament. I met with several different member states, in particular with their intelligence services, their ministries of justice and foreign affairs, to try and convince them of the need to designate all of Hezbollah. As you probably know, in July 2013, they ultimately designated part of it, and that's now actually being revisited. But what happened in almost every one of those meetings is 2 different things. One was a conversation where, on kind of substance, they were concerned, these European countries, that if they, and it's similar to what you hear in Australia actually, that if they were to designate all of Hezbollah, maybe they wouldn't be able to have as much influence in Lebanon, and maybe that might even further destabilize Lebanon. Some Europeans are saying, well, you know, in the wake of the Beirut bombing, now's not the time to talk about further designation of Hezbollah. It might further destabilize things. I counter that nothing is more destabilizing to Lebanon or the region than Hezbollah. But the other thing they would say time and time again is, how are we supposed, on the basis of what are we supposed to do anything? We don't have any information. You Americans don't tell us any information. And what little information we have is classified. There's no one place we can just go and get this information. So at the time, perhaps a little naively, I thought the book would scratch that itch. And it's a great book. You should buy many, many copies for Hanukkah and birthday presents. But the problem is that you can't ask everybody to go with a ruler through every little detail of a book that has this much information. And it's really to the credit of my good friend, Mary Horan, who was the publications director at the Washington Institute until last year. She was taken from us too early by cancer. She sat me down and she said, listen, the book is great, but you need to make this user-friendly. This could actually have great policy impact. And so that's what we did. I'm going to share my screen now. I'm going to show you a little bit about the map, make a few points, and then I'm going to try and stop a little early to save as much time for questions, because there's a lot going on. As Colin said, you have the Beirut explosion, you have the verdict in the Special Tribunal for Lebanon today, lots of stuff going on. So what we did here is we hired a mapping company and we plotted in all of the information I have. We went through all the documents that are out there, things I've collected on my own, things that are out there publicly available, court cases that we had to go out and get. Nothing in here is classified, but a lot is declassified. It's a lot of former FBI, CIA material in here. So we created this landing page, and you can read about the map. You can do it actually in English or Arabic or Farsi or French or German, Hebrew or Spanish. You get all the videos. We're trying to make it interactive. But if you close out of this and you get to the map itself, I want to show you a little bit about what we can do here. Just have to move over the pictures of all of you on the Zoom thing so I can see my screen here. So the first thing about this that makes it different than anything else, this is a completely navigable map. You can drag it around. You can scroll in. Let's say, for argument's sake, you're sitting in Australia. You can click on anywhere in the map, and you'll get a drop-down menu on the right-hand side of all of the entries in the map that are associated with this timeline. And we thought long and hard. We decided to use the word associated because not everything actually happens there. So in the case of Australia, in Sydney, for example, we will have pegged to Sydney something that happens in Sydney, something that happens somewhere else in Australia, but we don't know where, or something that happens relating to an Australian victim of a Hezbollah act of violence, terrorism, or, for example, a case of an Australian Hezbollah operative. So, for example, you're probably quite aware that if we can click on one of these, that Hassan Haj Hassan, a Lebanese dual citizen, worked together with an Australian dual citizen as part of the Burgas Bulgaria plot. And so that's why this entry is tied to Australia. And you can see that what we have here is something called spider lines, in this case, showing his travel, because that's what this entry is about. And we show you how he traveled from Lebanon. I'm sorry, this is actually fleeing to Lebanon after the fact. And for every entry, we have two different sets of things here. One is, if I start at the bottom, see also, other entries throughout the map that are linked to this, and you can go right down a rabbit hole, and then in the top left here, we have a way to climb back out the rabbit hole, a back button. But what's much more interesting are the documents. I'm not asking anybody to take my word for it. And there'll be plenty of people who will disagree and they'll interpret documents differently. That's fine. This is to start a conversation. What we've done here is we've collected the documents and we've made them available for you. So you want to read the Europol press release based on this, we have it here for you. You can print it, you can download it. You want to read about the FBI press release, you can do that too. We've got it here for you. This is my product and something that the Washington Institute, so we're putting in a lot of our own material here too as source documents. So I got my hands on the interrogation of the Hezbollah operative Hussam Yaqub in Cyprus, wrote a very long detailed piece about it. We include this here. So you can dig down and you can go right back out. I just used the back button, took us back to Australia, and you can see a whole bunch of different things. If you want, during the questions and answers, we can go through this. But there are a few things you might not be aware of. For example, that Hezbollah had a plan. They didn't actually do it, but they had a plan to think about, it was just preliminary, but think about targeting the Olympics in 2000. They had another plan to recruit people in Indonesia and make them go to Australia, stay there for a while, and then go from Australia to Israel, because they thought it would be less suspicious if people were traveling from Australia going to Israel at a time when Hezbollah was sending operatives from around the world, from Great Britain, from Germany, from Indonesia, to go to Israel, either to carry out espionage, spying operations, or in some cases, actual attacks. So by virtue of this, whatever part of the world you're interested in, you can just go there and you can look at it. Don't think that I'm only pointing at the rest of the world. We got a tremendous number of entries here in the United States. And I just want to give you one type of example. Aside from being able to search the map, you can use a keyword search. We've inserted a dictionary, so you can use, for example, any spelling of the name Mohammed, and however the defendant or culprit spells his name, that'll come up. So I want to give you an example, for example, of some of these FBI reports. So, for example, on the West Coast of the United States, trying to keep it as close to Australia as I can to make it relevant, the FBI reported in 1994 in a report that was about international radical fundamentalism, an analytical overview of groups and trends. It was not limited to Hezbollah, but on the several pages related to Hezbollah, they included information on Hezbollah activity around the country. And one of the things they noted is that members of one West Coast Hezbollah cell had reportedly initiated a neighborhood watch program in order to alert cell members of the FBI presence. So you can click on this if you want to get a slightly larger view. We can put documents in here. We can put pictures in there. We have videos sometimes up here. But of course, you don't need to do that. You can just go straight to the documents, and we provide the document for you, the Hezbollah section that is, and you can just download it from there. We also have a tremendous amount of declassified CIA reporting in here. Lots of different things, mostly about the early years. And that's still very useful because it helps dispel, for example, the myth that Hezbollah didn't exist until it formally announced itself with an open letter in 1985, and that all those early Beirut bombings, that was some other strange and mysterious organization called the Islamic Jihad Organization. Reuters actually published an article today using that language. Hezbollah, some mysterious thing that may or may not be tied to Hezbollah carried out those bombings. CIA report after CIA report after CIA report here talks about how Hezbollah, using the cover name of Islamic Jihad Organization, did this, that, and the other thing. But I'll give you a really interesting and kind of random example that there's no way you knew about because I didn't know about it. In April 1992, so this is just after the Hezbollah bombing of the Israeli embassy in Buenos Aires, and likely because of that, the CIA issues a report entitled Iran, Enhanced Terrorist Capabilities and Expanding Target Selection. And in that report, they look back a couple of years and it states that Hezbollah, and of all groups, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, began planning a joint operation, which never happened, by the way, but began planning a joint operation in late 1990 against Jewish emigres from the former Soviet Union who were congregated at a Warsaw synagogue. So first of all, it doesn't get any more textbook terrorism than that. This is not targeting soldiers. This is not about occupation. This is just targeting refugees. It didn't happen. It's interesting that Palestinian Islamic Jihad was involved in this. I attribute this to the period exactly when Iran was trying to get Palestinian Islamic Jihad to be more global, and ultimately they said, no, we're going to focus on Israel and stuff here. But it's interesting that they were even thinking that far. Now, I can take you all over the world, and I can take you back in time, but I don't want to waste too much time. I want you all to navigate the map at your own leisure, and I should say this is available on our website, WashingtonInstitute.org, for free. Enjoy it. I do want to show you a couple of things that will take us to some of the stuff that's going on right now. So one of these declassified CIA reports from February 1987 is a memo entitled Lebanon's Ports, Gateways for Instability and Terrorism. Now, it's really amazing. You can go read it for yourself. How much of it is irrelevant, not relevant to today, including, you'll see the title of this entry, CIA report discusses Hezbollah's lack of port access. In 1987, all the other terrorist groups, primarily the Palestinian terrorist groups, had access to parts of the point. Hezbollah was new. They hadn't yet established themselves. But each of the other sectarian mafia bosses, which is a theme that very much is still the case today in Lebanon, very much part of the problem and the corruption, etc., they did. Now, of course, in time, Hezbollah came not just one of, but the most dominant of the sectarian mafia boss sectarian parties in Lebanon. In fact, it's the only one that is both part of the system, the political system, and above the political system. And that if it doesn't like what you do, it'll simply turn its guns on you, as it did in May 2008, when it took over downtown Beirut by force of arms, when it didn't like the Lebanese government trying to prevent them from collecting their own independent intelligence at the airport and building their own independent fiber optic communications lines throughout the country. We were talking earlier about the Rafi Hariri verdict. It's a useful entry to be able to show you that we can get really, really close in. The map has really great capabilities. If you want to know exactly where it happened, I can take you right there. And of course, we can include all these documents as we have from the Special Tribunal for Lebanon. But there's much more that is really interesting that I'm quite sure you're not aware of relating to the investigation. So if we'll just let me type in Special Tribunal For example, very few people are aware that according to Dutch intelligence, and I know because I interviewed them personally, Hezbollah reportedly conducted quiet surveillance of the Hague-based Special Tribunal headquarters just before it opened. The tribunal occupies the refurnished former headquarters of the Dutch intelligence service. And the court was made out of the intelligence service's former basketball court. As they were finishing the refurbishing of the building to serve as a court, there was a building across the street that was under construction. And of course, there was security watching the tribunal headquarters, and they found a bunch of Lebanese people posing as journalists with video cameras, and they're quite certain that what they were doing was conducting pre-operational surveillance. Not that they were necessarily going to do anything with it, but that they were collecting it is something that most people are not aware of. There's a lot more that people are not aware of when it comes to the tribunal. One of them, and this is really important for people who are engaged in the discussion about the wisdom of designating all of Hezbollah as a terrorist group, which is a conversation that still needs to be had in Australia. And that is that there is only one international body, UN or otherwise, that has actually gone to the trouble of defining terrorism under international law. And you might think that's academic and it's esoteric, but at the end of the day, Hezbollah is able to function only because it's able to say, look, we're doing something different. It's not just that we're political and we're social and we also do violence. They say the violence they do is something other than terrorism. Resistance can never be terrorism. Well, the Special Tribunal for Lebanon, all the lawyers got together. They defined terrorism using international law. And what's amazing is the group activity, the group behind the activity that they used to make this definition was Hezbollah. There's only one case where an international court has defined terrorism under international law, and they did so in the context of Hezbollah. So there's lots and lots more I could show you about the map. I just want to show you two last things, and then we can engage in conversation. There are 4 ways to search the map. I showed you how to navigate it and just click on dots. I showed you that you can go into the search box and you can type in, for example, CEDAR, because I happen to know it will bring up Operation CEDAR, this joint US-European operation, revealing the extent of Hezbollah's narco-terrorism and money laundering activities around the world. In fact, there was just an individual who was extradited to the United States from Cyprus. He is intimately involved in a massive money laundering episode that crosses every ocean and has a very significant footprint in Australia. But there are 2 other ways that you can search the map. One is to look at the chronology bar on the bottom of the page. Every entry has a bar on the top of the line, but what's more interesting to me is if you click on a year, you'll get a drop-down menu of all the incidents in that year. And that can be really useful for law enforcement and academics alike. But really the most interesting thing, at least for me, because it took the most effort to do it, was events by category. So if you look at the map, everything is dark blue, light blue, or pink, with a few exceptions of small black things that are associated. Something happens someplace else, but there's a connection to this other location. What we did is we coded every entry. As a primary code, plots and attacks, finance and logistics, and counterterrorism actions. And then under each of these, multiple secondary categories. So if you want to, for example, let's center the map. If you want to know where are all the plots and attacks on the map, and only the plots and attacks, if you click on that button, 2 things will happen. You'll get a drop-down menu on the left-hand side of all the plots and attacks, but don't look at that. Watch the map right now, and you'll see that it depopulates a little bit. And the only things you'll see in large color now are the plots and attacks. And just to give you a sense of how active Hezbollah has been over the years, with the most recent incident being in July, you just bear with me as I scroll. I'm not scrolling slowly, I'm going quite quickly, but there's a lot of entries. These are only the plots and attacks. This is not schools. This is not politics. This is just trying to kill people. If you wanted to search by any particular type of trying to kill people, assassinations, attack attempt, bombing, hijacking, kidnapping, you could search by just that too. The same for finance and logistics. You can search by use of fake IDs, finance, Hezbollah statement related to their international activities, pre-operational surveillance, recruitment, smuggling, travel, and weapons procurement. And finally, we include counterterrorism actions, not only because those are important, but they usually include a lot of information about the underlying illicit activity that Hezbollah engaged in. So an arrest, we'll have an arrest warrant, tell us what Hezbollah did. A designation or a prescription will say something about Hezbollah. Foiled plots, indictments, judicial rulings, military action statement or report, or undercover operation. And what's perhaps most interesting here, I didn't think would be that useful, but there's a lot of interest in the entry for judicial rulings. And the reason is because when other countries are looking or considering banning Hezbollah in whole or in part, the first thing they ask for is who else did it? Who else has ruled in any type of court anywhere in the world that Hezbollah is a terrorist organization? And the answer is a lot. And we've got just several of them here. There are a lot more coming, a lot of different cases. And we're trying to make this as user-friendly as possible, both to the academic and the journalist and the student, but also to the policymaker and to the people working in law enforcement and intelligence. I can tell you, speaking to intelligence people around the world, briefing them on this via Zoom as I am you, they're very, very interested in having an unclassified source of information. Governments come to them saying, can you give us some examples of Hezbollah doing this or Hezbollah doing something in this location? And they have to consider declassifying information. What they said to me is, look, we may not agree with everything you have here. We may not use every entry you have here, but there's more than enough that we'll certainly agree with, and you've done a lot of the work for us. So the goal now, moving forward, we still have at least 300 more entries to add. As you can see in the top left, we have almost 1,047 entries. We tell you when it's last updated because we'll be updating things and changing things. We're adding in more documents, and eventually it'll just be, maybe a few minutes, an hour a day as we continue to keep it updated. But the idea is for this to be an iterative living project. So let me stop there, and I'll keep the screen up in case anybody has questions related to the map itself. And I'm happy to take whatever questions you have. I'm really grateful to AIJAC for giving me this opportunity. And I'm grateful to all of you who are tuning in for taking the time.
Thank you, Matt, for that. Appreciate the detail of this map. Now, I'm going to take the first question. I will remind the audience, please don't be shy. You can use the raise hand feature in Zoom to ask a question. Down the bottom of your screen, you'll see a participant tab. When you see the list of participants at the bottom, you'll see a raised hand feature. We will cross and turn your audio on so you'll be able to ask Matt your first question. Now, this seems to be a very busy map. My question is related to Australia's stance on Hezbollah. Now, we can see here that there is interaction with Australia and connections with Australia in Hezbollah's activities. But as you're aware, Australia only lists the external security organization of Hezbollah and not the full organization. So how does this impact their ability to engage in the sort of criminal schemes that you've detailed across Europe, the United States, and South and Latin America?
So thanks for the thanks for the question. I think that the best way to answer this is I'll take you to an entry on the latest Europol report, which has a paragraph detailing Hezbollah money laundering scheme. Not only because, as I mentioned, through this one individual, Mohammed Ammar, parts of these schemes very, very much touch on Australia, but because the European Union's police organization was quite blunt, and I'm reading to you. Hezbollah, quote, is suspected of trafficking diamonds and drugs and of money laundering via the trade in secondhand cars. Capital is sent to Lebanon through the banking system, but also through physical transport of cash via commercial aviation. The report notes that investigations face the difficulty of demonstrating that the funds collected are channeled to the military wing of the organization. Europol is publicly complaining here that by virtue of a partial designation, it's incumbent upon them to prove that Hezbollah is spending the money on a bullet. Since money is fungible, it's almost impossible to prove that. And as many of you know, I started my career in the FBI and FBI counterterrorism. In all my time there, I ever knew of only one case where we were able to tie a dollar raised in the United States to a bullet procured for an operation abroad. And so it really is asking law enforcement to act with one and a half hands tied behind their back. Having said that, Australian intelligence and law enforcement, despite the partial designation, are quite good on this subject. When it comes to cooperating on these types of things, their cooperation on the case of Mohammed Hamar was complete. I don't think that if there had been a full designation, it would have been better in this particular case, because the guy was engaged in black on white criminal activity, massive money laundering. If he had been doing it, not for terrorism, they would have been involved as well. It's really, really important to ban an organization in its entirety when the organization is able to leverage its non-military activities for military purposes. So without pulling up entry after entry, though we could, there are dozens upon dozens of entries here that get to this point. Consider 2 different Hezbollah parliamentarians. You'd think that those would be people involved in the highest politics and nothing else. Amin al-Shari and Mohammed Ra'ad. One of them was working hand in glove with the head of Hezbollah's security apparatus, Wafik Safa, who, by the way, is a name that's come up now in terms of the Beirut ports. I see there's a question about that. We'll get back to that in a minute. What were they doing? Nothing political. They were identifying Lebanese Hezbollah supporters who would be good candidates to go abroad, obtain foreign non-Lebanese citizenship, become dual citizens of America, Australia, France, Canada, whatever it is, so that they could then go abroad on their non-Lebanese passports for Hezbollah operations. That's what Hezbollah politicians are doing. Or the other Hezbollah politician went not just threatening Lebanese banks, what would happen to the bankers if they adhered to international anti-money laundering, counter-terror finance standards and denied Hezbollah banking privilege. They threatened their families. That's what the politicians are doing. So I just can't stress enough how, it's trying to play cricket without a bat. You need all the tools to be able to do this in a robust fashion.
So just on that, and I'll conclude before handing over to the audience, how does the recent explosion in Beirut potentially alter the approach of organizations in trying to pursue a greater designation of Hezbollah?
So the map does a lot of different things, one of which is it really it includes all these entries that demonstrate the overlap between all the different wings of Hezbollah. Ironically, the one group that is just consistently honest and accurate about this is Hezbollah. They get very annoyed if you say that these are different things. No. Everything we're doing is for the purpose of perpetuating our idea, their idea of jihad. Even if their idea of jihad is morphing and changing, it's no longer, not everything is not targeting Israel, though they try and make it that way. They're now fighting in Syria. They're helping the Houthi rebels in Yemen. They're doing things in Iraq. Lots of things in lots of places that have nothing to do with Israel. By virtue of putting all this out there, you're really able to explain to people what is and isn't happening, and we're putting it all in one place. So, for example, I showed you that we have these events by category. We're debating, and I think we are going to add under one of these anyway, a widget that will, take you directly to entries that get to the myth of the disparate wings of Hezbollah. And in other words, we're trying to identify themes that people are interested in, and when we're going to organize that material together, you don't have to search it, find it, play with keywords. We're just going to make it all available to you. So we just did that with the court cases this week, and we're going to be looking to do that with the issue of the wings as well.
Thank you for that. I'll now hand over to Jeremy Samuel.
Thank you very much. Wow, Matthew, what an amazing tool. Sorry, I'll put my video on while I'm speaking. Thank you for the presentation. I guess my question's very simple. With respect to the Beirut explosion, is it a Hezbollah facility? And if so, do you think the truth will ever come out about that?
So it's a great question. And the honest answer is we don't know. The likelihood that the actual facility, the actual warehouse, was a Hezbollah facility, I think is quite low. What we do know, however, is that Hezbollah controls part of the port. The Israelis made this public at the UN last year. And when the US Treasury Department designated Wafik Safa, that head of Hezbollah security that I mentioned earlier, they specifically noted that Wafik Safa runs all kinds of illicit stuff through the seaport, the airport, and other border entries. And the reason people go through him to do what they want to do is specifically to avoid government scrutiny. So there's no question that they do that. There's no question that they controlled part of the port. The likelihood that Hezbollah wasn't aware of this much, it's actually a mind-boggling amount of ammonium nitrate marked not as fertilizer, but marked as the explosive type, being kept in crazy conditions. It beggars belief that that's possible. Now, I don't put this only at the feet of Hezbollah. The way Lebanon has worked, and the reason the system has to be changed, and why I hope the French don't successfully push for just a new unity government with the same old mafiosos, is that what Lebanese want is a change in the system. Right? People were making money off of this somehow at the expense of the Lebanese people, and now, unfortunately, at the expense of a great many Lebanese lives. There is some speculation that Hezbollah was taking little bits of the ammonium nitrate. Maybe that was something that was very kind of attractive, too good to pass up. Some people are making a comparison between the fact that Hezbollah modus operandi around the world over the past several years now has been to construct explosives using ammonium nitrate. But I need to caution, it's a different ammonium nitrate than what was being stored at the port. Hezbollah around the world has been procuring ice packs, primarily manufactured at one particular factory in Guangzhou, China, near Hong Kong. And those ice packs, you know, if your kid is playing, you call it football, I'd call it soccer, and they twist their ankle, your son or your daughter, the coach takes out this plastic ice pack, you punch it, you break the membrane, the chemicals mix, and it gets very cold for 20, 30 minutes. Well, before you break that membrane, 1/2 of that chemical compound is basically ammonium nitrate. And it's perfectly legitimate to buy. It's kind of like the way, you know, pseudoephedrine can be used to make methamphetamines. So that's what they used to make the explosives in Burgas, Bulgaria. It's what they were stockpiling in the basement of a safe house in Cyprus. It's what they were stockpiling at a facility north of Bangkok, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Ali Karani, a Hezbollah operative convicted here in the United States about a year ago. Cards on the table, I served as an expert witness in that case. He was convicted. One of the things that he was sent to do is to become an American citizen, which he did, get an American passport, which he did. What's the first thing he does with that passport? And by the way, when you apply for passport here, you have to say, do you have any travel plan? And he said no. Immediately after getting his passport, he applies for a visa to China. Why? He went to travel to this factory in Guangzhou. There's no evidence that the company did anything wrong or knew anything about it, but Hezbollah sent him there to negotiate a discount bulk purchase of these ice packs. So yes, Hezbollah uses these ammonium nitrate bombs, but mostly because the ice packs are like a dual use item that they can legally purchase. And it's a slightly different ammonium nitrate here. That doesn't mean that it wouldn't be an attractive item for Hezbollah. But right now, there's no hard evidence. A lot of very, very thick and heavy speculation, and some of it with a very good reason. It's very possible that this wasn't Hezbollah at all, that Hezbollah had components for precision-guided missiles near the airport, which is a fact, in 3 different locations, but not at the seaport. We don't know. And it's not clear what the initial explosion was. Was it fireworks? Was it explosives? We don't yet know. It's interesting that the FBI, on the one hand, is going to help the investigation, but that doesn't mean people will cooperate. Michel Aoun, the president, who's very, very close with Hezbollah, has said he doesn't think there needs to be an international investigation. And I understand that the person that he assigned, the judge that he assigned to oversee the Lebanese investigation, is married to his niece.
Thank you for that, Matt. I'll now hand over to Svi Fleischer.
Good afternoon, or good morning, whatever we are. Thank you very much, Matt. It's a very amazing amount of research you've done here. I want to ask a little bit more about our region. Your map does deal with Hezbollah activity in Southeast Asia and Australia and even New Zealand, but a lot of your entries I noticed are somewhat older. We need to make the case. We're trying to make the case to the Australian government that that Hezbollah. We need to look again at Hezbollah being at the ban on Hezbollah only on the external security rig at the moment. But part of the thing we have to say to them is this matters to Australia. Could you give us a bit of an overview about what Hezbollah is doing in our region at the moment? What is its likely presence in Australia beyond what's in your map? What are the dangers to Australia of not doing it?
Lots of questions there, Tzvi. You asked more than your share.
Fair enough.
It comes down to this. Hezbollah is using a lot of different places around the world right now, including Australia, for a lot of criminal illicit enterprise. Mohammed Ammar was the main Australian connection to this massive money laundering, narco trafficking ring, which has been raising tremendous amounts, millions upon millions of dollars for Hezbollah, which is all the more important right now, given the fact that Iran is under really significant sanctions. The price of oil has fallen through the floor. There is the war in Syria, which has soaked up a lot of the money that Iran has provided to Hezbollah that would otherwise go to Hezbollah activities in Lebanon or their foreign operations. And of course, the coronavirus. All of those things have made it much more difficult for Iran to provide as much money to Hezbollah as they might otherwise. It's still a significant amount of money, and far and away the largest amount of money Hezbollah gets. But it's made kind of diversifying their portfolio and dipping into international criminal enterprises all that much more important for them. I'm sure there's a lot more information about Hezbollah activity in Southeast Asia in general and in Australia in particular that's not in the open source. That's all this is. And I spend a lot of time telling journalists in particular, and I write about it in the introductory essay for the product, people shouldn't look at this and say, I see, well, there's nothing really current other than money laundering. In Australia, clearly Hezbollah is not doing anything else there. That just means that based on what's available in the open source, that's all we can say. I had one intelligence official say to me, so could I look at your map and see, if we could put to bed the argument about whether or not killing Qasem Soleimani was a good idea or not? Did Hezbollah and company do anything after the killing of Qasem Soleimani? And I answered, no, you can't. First of all, it's too recent. Second of all, it's very sensitive. The operation probably would be classified for a very long time. And therefore, you look at my map, what you're going to see is what's publicly available. You're not going to see, I'm sure there's been all kinds of activities that we can't talk about, that we don't know about if you don't have access to classified information. And this is absolutely not classified. What's interesting, perhaps the most interesting thing that come out, not really out of the map, but predating that, the book, was the extent to which Hezbollah has run networks in and from Southeast Asia. I'm talking about sophisticated fraudulent passport production. I'm talking about, the fact that they came this close just weeks before they successfully blew up the Amia Jewish Community Center in Buenos Aires. They came this close to blowing up the Israeli embassy in Bangkok. I'm talking about dispatching people from the region to go to Israel to carry out surveillance. One operative, an Indonesian named Zainal bin Talib, despite all of Israel's incredible security capabilities, Zainal bin Talib made it to Israel and back twice before the Israelis knew about him. So there's a lot of opportunity for them in the region. And what's more interesting still, I don't know if it would still be the case today, but back in the 1990s, if you wanted to be an international jihadist out of Southeast Asia, there weren't that many opportunities. There was no Jamal Islamiyah, there certainly was no Islamic State. A lot of these guys were, one village converted to Islam, one village converted to Christianity, and they fought each other. If you wanted to do something more than that, Hezbollah came and gave you an opportunity. Because of that, in the 1990s in particular, Hezbollah had a great, Shia Hezbollah had a great many Sunni operatives and operatives who were Sunnis who converted to Shiism. So there's a lot of really interesting stuff in the map, extensive surveillance and plans to try and blow up a ship in the Malacca Straits and elsewhere. A lot of activity in Singapore that I think most people are not aware of. And some of that type of activity resonates to today. A lot of similar patterns between, for example, conducting surveillance of ships in Southeast Asia several years ago, compared to Hezbollah sending an operative from the United States to carry out surveillance of the Panama Canal zone and of ships in the Panama Canal and of Israeli and American interests both in Panama. So there's a lot of information on there. You're right, a lot of it is dated. The most recent bit is, and it's really worth a close look, especially in terms of the international connectivity and the scale and scope of the activity across the globe, related to the case of Mohammed Ammar Rassan Diab, who's the one who was just extradited to the United States from Cyprus, and others.
Thank you for that. Now we'll hand over to Gary Hertz.
G'day, Matt. Good to hear you. The Hariri decision finally got there, or have we? What do you see the ramifications for it in relation to the decision, and where it's going to go?
One of the great things about doing a webinar for AIJAC is that you get questions from people who have hosted you and taken care of you. It's great to see you, Gary. I think that the Hariri verdict is going to be largely misunderstood in the press in the first 24 to 48 hours. If you look at a lot of the press, you know, it's Hezbollah goes unscathed. It's 3 of the 4 people are acquitted. There's a great quote that people put in there that, you know, there's insufficient evidence to say that Hezbollah leadership or Syria was behind it. That's kind of the topic sentence, and then they explain that. And what I've been explaining to the New York Times and others today is, you know, a trial, especially in international court, Gary's a lawyer, he can tell you better than I, it's not actually about what happened, it's about what you can prove under the rule of law and under the evidentiary rules that the court is being held. And this court was being held under the evidentiary rules of the Lebanese legal system. So there were a bunch of things that might otherwise have hit threshold, but for the fact that it didn't under Lebanese law. The circumstantial evidence that was collected in this case was mind-boggling. A truly incredible and actually very, very cutting-edge use of cell phone data. But it was circumstantial. Not all, but almost all of it was circumstantial. And so it shouldn't surprise that the 3 foot soldiers, the 3 nobodies, who were primarily being charged with finding the patsy, that they tried to pretend that it was carried out by a Sunni group. They made up a Sunni group. They tried to pretend that this guy carried it out. Actually, they just abducted him, and we assume they killed him. And then, you know, producing the fake video of this guy. I mean, the video is real, but of him saying, I'm carrying this out. That's all they were charged with. They weren't being charged with the actual murder. Ayash was being charged with the actual murder. Mustafa Badruddin, who was the head of Hezbollah's terrorist wing, was charged as well. Once he was killed fighting in Syria, he was removed from the indictment. At the end of the day, my takeaway is that a senior Hezbollah commander has been convicted by international court with carrying out and overseeing the assassination of Rafiq Hariri for the express purpose not only of killing him, but of killing a great many other people and of terrorizing Lebanese society. They make it very, very clear that this was not an operation that could have been carried out by, you know, some loner, some lone wolf, some renegade. This was a massive RDX explosion, a huge truck bomb. There were people clearly in what they called the red cell phone network that was led by Ayash, pre-positioned, telling people who was where. And I think it's very, very telling that in all of the most important charges, Ayash was convicted. Now, mind you, under the court's rules, both defense and prosecution have 30 days to appeal. Prosecution has already said today they are strongly considering appealing the acquittal of the other 3. And I assume that the defense will appeal because there's nothing to be lost from an appeal. The whole thing was held in absentia, so while there will be a sentencing phase, it doesn't mean anything. And should they ever capture these guys, they would be retried. So really what this was meant to do is to provide some closure. And I think that because of the way the judges decided to handle this, it didn't quite. At the very end, the judges looked at the families of the victims and said, listen, we know there's nothing we can do to make it feel better. There's nothing we can do or say to bring your loved ones back. But we hope that this process and our efforts to try and bring this to light, it gives you some type of closure. At the end of the day, Hezbollah will be able to say, you see, quote, they found no evidence that Hezbollah leadership did this. The biggest hole in that argument is that Mustafa Badruddin, again, removed from the indictment when he was killed fighting in Lebanon, but Mustafa Badruddin is one of the most senior Hezbollah guys out there. Do you really think they were moonlighting? At one point they said, look, we can see that they were doing surveillance of Rafi Hariri, but we can't say that they knew for sure in advance that it was to kill him. And under Lebanese law, if you can't prove that they knew in advance that it was to kill him, you can't convict them of accessory to murder or conspiracy. My comment is, why do you think they were surveilling him? Like, that's something people normally do. This was just, it's Tuesday, we're going to surveil Rafi Hariri for funsies. This is clearly criminal conduct. In any event, the biggest takeaway for me is that Ayyash was convicted on the biggest charges. A senior Hezbollah operative was convicted of a massive conspiracy. The court concedes it's a conspiracy. He's convicted of conspiracy along with murder, etc. And they concede that he was part of something bigger than themselves. They just can't prove that under the rule of law.
Thank you for that, Matt. Now we'll hand over to Sharon Middleman.
Hi, Matt. Thanks for your talk today. I just want to ask you about the threat that Hezbollah poses to Israel today, especially as Iran has set up bases in Syria.
So Hezbollah does not much like Israel. And despite the fact that they are doing things much farther afield from Israel, things that they will somehow describe as being related to Israel because that's part of their raison d'etre. One point Nasrallah said, the road to Jerusalem goes through Damascus. That's just a sign of someone who failed basic, 5th grade geography. But they still are intent on trying to contest Israel at all terms. Hezbollah, and for that matter, Israel, neither wants a full-fledged war right now, which is why right before the Beirut explosion, there were significant tensions along the blue line, the de facto border between Israel and Lebanon. But both sides were trying to keep it contained. What had happened was that Israel carried out another airstrike in Syria. Usually Israel is very, very careful not to target Hezbollah operatives, just weaponry. In this case, a Hezbollah operative was killed. And Hezbollah's made very clear that's their red line. The last time this happened was a year ago, August. And on September 1st of last year, Hezbollah fired 3 Katyusha Kornet anti-tank guided missiles at an Israeli military ambulance near the border town of Avivim. And this type of effort to kind of take the fight to Israel, scratch that resistance itch, still be able to tell people that they're about the resistance is important to them, especially after the Beirut explosion, where Hezbollah is in a very, very awkward position because it's usually being challenged on its militancy. And here, and it alone is being charged on its militancy because only it still maintains weapons outside the government. Here, it is being challenged along with all the other sectarian militias and parties on its politics for being part and parcel of the corrupt crony political system. And that's a huge, huge challenge to them, right? The only reason they just were able to justify maintaining their weapons under the Taif Accord is because only they could defend Lebanon from Israel, the resistance. Well, what if they're not doing a whole lot of resistance targeting Israel? So they need to scratch that itch from time to time. They still definitely want to destroy Israel. They have done a lot very consistently trying to recruit people from abroad to go into Israel, trying to recruit Israeli Arabs, a lot of honey traps on Facebook and other things. And so when they can't do it themselves, they're trying to recruit others who can do it on their behalf. And this is something, look, they walk and chew gum at the same time. They can be focused on things in Burgas, Bulgaria, and they can be focused on things on the border. I will tell you, one of my concerns is that if it becomes more difficult for Hezbollah because of domestic issues, because Israel is getting so good at protecting the border, to be able to respond to certain things in some small scale type of way along the border, does that at some point encourage them to try and do something more abroad? Maybe, maybe not. There's danger to doing international terrorism abroad, and it sometimes has a little bit of an attraction by virtue of presenting what you think might be an option to do something with reasonable deniability. Being able to deny that you were the one behind it, and therefore making it more difficult for your adversary to respond.
Now over to Jamie Hymes.
Thanks, Matt. Thanks, Joel. So Joe Biden's promised to bring the US back into compliance with the JCPOA nuclear deal, which presumably entails lifting of most of the sanctions imposed on Iran by the Trump administration. So is there any way that a Biden administration can do that without actually empowering Iran's regional aggression?
So this is a huge, huge question. And to do it justice, we don't have time to do it justice. I will tell you this. I thought that when the JCPOA was being negotiated, there was a better deal to be had. There were clearly some very big flaws in the deal, including the expiration of the arms embargo. I can tell you from speaking to a great many negotiators who were involved in it, and not only from the US side, that they were very cognizant of this, and their plan was immediately after implementation to start doing things to make it more difficult for Iran to be able to do those things if and when those expiration dates came around. My personal feeling and my briefing to the Trump administration before it came to office during the transition was, I know you don't like the deal. The deal is better than no deal. Enforce the hell out of the deal, but don't leave it. And I think I've been vindicated in that. I think that there are ways, whether with a new deal, I don't think the Biden administration is just simply going to go back to the deal that was, even if they'd wanted to. I just don't see that as tenable. But to try and negotiate something new, I don't have a problem with trying to do that. There are ways that it can be done better. I also think that by virtue of, look, I mean, for example, the Trump administration is saying that any day now it's going to try and invoke the snapback. Big debates as to whether or not the administration has the legal basis to do that now that it's pulled out of the deal. But if you look at the UN Security Council resolution, it says that any of the following countries can do snapback, including the US. This is an argument for international lawyers. The fact is, from a sanctions perspective, and I used to be the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Intelligence and Treasury, I was there when part of the team that put in place the sanctions regime. The vast majority of sanctions that would be snapped back are actually de facto in place already because of secondary sanctions. Snapback might actually end up being more window dressing than otherwise because there's so many things being done already. Personally, I work at a nonpartisan think tank. I was critical of much in the Obama administration. I'm critical of much in the Trump administration. I'm very, very critical of a lot of Trump's foreign policy and lack of foreign policy. And the fact that people complained during the Obama administration, I was one of them, that the US was leading from behind. And I've argued and written and said it's not the first time. We're not leading from behind right now. We just are behind. And it's having significant impact on the ability for the US to project power and to protect its friends and allies. So I think at the end of the day, there is a lot that a Biden administration could do that would be very, very positive regarding Iran. And I don't see their position of saying, listen, we're not going to fail to be a party to this anymore as a problem. I wouldn't have signed on to the JCPOA in the first instance as the Obama administration had it. The French delegation in particular was adamant that more could have been had. Think about that for a minute. The French were being harder aligned than the US at the time. And I don't think it's possible just to go back to the deal as it was, but I do think that there are great opportunities and that many of them would actually provide greater security. There's lots of ways to contain Iran. Right now, Iran has started centrifuges again. We are at a sensitive time once again, as we were before the JCPOA, where they're getting close to a capability of, not quite, but of breakout. And I think that that's largely because the US decided to break out of the deal. Flawed as it was, I thought there was more opportunity to hold Iran's feet to the fire, staying within the deal.
Thanks, Matt. The final question will go to Jeremy Jones. Just unmuting Jeremy there.
Try to spotlight, Joel.
Yeah, I'm doing that now too. Stand by.
Thank you. Matt, it's been terrific. We've all learned a great deal, and I hope a lot of people will be using that map, not just from this group, but beyond. We have on this call, watching this video, people from Australia and New Zealand, as well as others. I was just wondering, could you give us your recommendation, your policy prescription? The Australian government's coming to you right now. There's a problem with Hezbollah. What should we be doing? For Australian government, New Zealand government, could be the same answer or different answers. Thank you.
So in the immediate, given current events, there are a couple of things. The first is there is, for all the obvious and appropriate reasons, a real push to provide humanitarian assistance to Lebanon. And I've been telling, and I'm not the only one, anyone who will listen, and I would say to Australian officials and officials from New Zealand as well, give that aid. Do not give it to the government of Lebanon. Give it to trusted international organizations. Otherwise, the government is going to squander it. The mafia bosses who created this problem in the first instance are going to find ways to dip into it. And arguably, the group that is most capable of doing that is the most militant and violent, not only against Israel, but against fellow Lebanese, and that is Hezbollah. The French, for all the right reasons, have taken a lead, and their lead post the Beirut explosion is focused on humanitarian support and political stability. Humanitarian support has to be done the right way. We can't afford for it to be done the wrong way. Give it, don't give it to the government. And political stability has to involve an interim government leading to a constitutional committee that will change the system of government in Lebanon. It is outdated. It does not serve the people. It is so outdated that you cannot even take a census in Lebanon, because if the census reveals that one sectarian community has shrunk and the other has gotten bigger, that would change the dynamic and who should hold what office. This system of government enriches the corrupt at the expense of governance for the people. The second thing I would say is we need to recognize that both for Lebanon, certainly for Israel, but for the region more broadly, there's arguably no group that contributes more to instability than Hezbollah. You might argue that that would be the Islamic State or Daesh, and you'd have a good argument there. What I'd say is there have been two groups of what we call foreign terrorist fighters, FTFs, traveling from around the world to fight on either side of this conflict in Iraq and Syria. Mostly when we talk about foreign terrorist fighters, you say that word, people hear Sunni. For understandable reasons, people need to be aware that there are about as many Shia foreign terrorist fighters as there are Sunnis. It's just that they're mostly coming from the region and then smaller numbers from the West. Designating Hezbollah in full is in the policy interests of Australia and New Zealand, not only, in fact, primarily not because of what they're doing in those countries, but because of the way they undermine Western interests in the region, because the way they undermine the safety and stability of our allies. And I don't only or even primarily mean Israel here, I mean Lebanon. I mean the Syrians who are suffering under the regime of Bashar al-Assad, who we should remember has killed and butchered more people than the Islamic State several times over, who's supported by Iran and Hezbollah, Shia militias under Hezbollah, and the Russian Air Force. There are so many reasons why recognizing Hezbollah for what it is and taking the simple action of making it clear to them we will not allow them to get away with really, really bad activity. We're talking about things like murder just because they're also involved in politics and in other types of non-violent activity. I just can't stress it enough. And again, I'll point you to Europol. Don't take it from Levitt. Listen to the law enforcement officers in Europe who are telling you the ways in which practically implementing law enforcement in Europe, they're operating with a hand tied behind their back because of the way the partial designation makes it difficult for them to be able to prosecute money laundering, blood diamonds, narco trafficking by Hezbollah unless they can actually show that a euro is buying a bullet. It's not how the world works.
Thank you very much for that, Matt. It was a splendid presentation.